You're listening to Restaurants Reinvented, a podcast for restaurant brands who want to put growth back on the menu. In each episode, Jen Kern, the CMO of Q, highlights innovators and change agents in the restaurant industry and uncovers how leading brands are modernizing their operations to drive efficiency and meet the evolving demands of guests. Let's get started.
Welcome back to Restaurants Reinvented. I am Jen Kern, the hostess here of the show. And today with me, I'm so excited. I have Milena Regos from the Unhustle movement. Hello, Milena.
Hi, Jen. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. Well, I'm really excited to talk with you today. I mean, we've had a few chats before this, just, in total transparency and lots of great chats. And I know that you have done some research on restaurants, which is fantastic. But I want to just kick off by saying, I've been running this labor series, which I've told you about. And there's the great reshuffling and the great resignation and now the great reexamination and the great everything, right? But what's really going on is an issue with culture and needing to improve culture and leadership and lifestyles of restaurant workers. So I'm excited to have you on to talk about all those things. And by way of introduction, can you give everyone your little background? What is Unhustle?
Thank you. Thank you, Jen. I'm excited to talk with you. Unhustle is a rebellion, basically, to live and work well. We want to flip the script on redefining success. What does success mean for us as a human being, as a collectively, as a society, and what is really important and meaningful and purposeful in our lives, and how do we go about putting our life first, creating a life that matters, and doing the work that excites us and brings us the financial security that we need, right? Mm-hmm. And doing all of this with purpose and joy and meaning. And so it is really the opposite of hustle culture. I see a big need personally, but also collectively as a society to look at what are we doing? The way we're working is broken, right? We're burned out, we're overstretched, overworked, stressed out, mental health is on the rise. So how do we change all of this thinking, the way we do business, so that it's good for the human, but it's also good for the bottom line?
Right. That's awesome. And I know that your movement has gained global recognition. So kudos to you on that.
Thank you.
Definitely caught my attention. I just saw the word and I was like, what does that mean? I want to know what that means. And I want to know more about it. Unhustle. It sounds interesting. And maybe that's my age and stage in life. I don't know. But I spent a big portion of my life hustling like nobody's business. And then got to the age of, I know you have a cool story, got to the age of 50 and was just like, I'm exhausted. And then the pandemic hit and I'm like, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So it's really good stuff. And I've been asking myself after I heard, some of your talks and read some of your articles, I've been asking myself, is there a labor shortage in restaurants or is there a well-being shortage? What say you?
That's a really interesting way of putting it. And yeah, I mean, you and I are about the same age. So we've gone down that road of work. And then one day, someday, if you're lucky, you get to retire and do what you love. Mm-hmm. But young people don't see it that way, right? Mm-hmm. They're like, I want to live now. I want to have a meaningful life now. I want to do something that brings me joy and purpose every day now. And so how do I, they don't want to wait. They don't want the house and the car and they want to have money and they want to be, well off, but they don't necessarily want to go down that road of, I'm going to be in the same career for 20 years, right? No one does that anymore, I don't think. Mm-hmm. So there's like a societal awakening, right? And we're seeing it. We're seeing it with the Great Resignation. And the numbers of how many people are burned out, how many people are seeking more meaning and purpose in their lives. We're seeing ripples, and I'm excited because as more and more of us talk about this, we're going to start slowly shifting that conversation. It really comes down to let's replace hustle culture with human culture. And let's live our lives now and still do high quality work.
Right. And so what is human culture?
So human-centered culture, the way I look at it, it's the opposite of hustle culture, right? If you look at hustle culture as is you exert yourself to the max. You're constantly doing. All your focus and energy is on work, and you're struggling, right? You're struggling. You're striving. Human-centered culture starts from the top. It starts with leadership. It starts with having more emphasis on these soft skills, which for a really long time we've put on the back burner. So empathy, vulnerability, treating humans as humans. And I speak to more about, white collar knowledge workers. But in the case of the restaurant industry, is like, okay, deep listening, treating people the way they want to be treated, not the way you want to be treated, because that's not really being in their shoes. Having more of open mind, positive workforce, giving people flexibility in how they work, when they work, being more open to providing learning resources. That's kind of really what young people want. And all of these things, I can keep going about describing it, but it's, what makes us human. Let's treat each other as with more emphasis on what makes us human, what humans want. And the benefit to that is that it shows an increase in performance for companies. So more of like conscious capitalism, as opposed to just this big orientation on maximizing profits at all costs. And in that case, the cost is the human.
Right. And, you touch on a really interesting generational point, because 75% of the workers in restaurants are between the ages of 16 and 25. So, and you talk about, I have kids in that age frame as well. And you talk about the generational shift of how we were brought into the workforce. And I know you're first generation from Bulgarian, you were born and raised in Bulgaria. You came here in your 20s? Yeah, for college. And I can imagine how hard you were working, right? And I was raised that same way, like work your butt off to make that career climb and get the next thing. And that the kids nowadays aren't like that. That generation, that 16 to 25 age group, they are looking for joy in life, like you say. They're looking for an experience. They're looking at other things. They don't want to just grind. It's not the way it is. So I know you pulled some stats for restaurants. I'd love for you to share those with us, because this whole idea of burnout has become kind of a buzzword, as well as self-care, kind of a buzzword. But what are some of the statistics you saw in restaurants in terms of burnout that even precedes the pandemic?
Absolutely. Yeah. So based on my research, about 80%, higher than 80% of people in the restaurant industry are burnout. And we already know that burnout is a really big thing. I think 77% of employees in general are burnout, but it's even higher in the restaurant industry. And it's just, it's the grind, right? And during the pandemic, a lot of people lost their jobs. So there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of pressure. Right. These 80%, 52% of food service and hospitality workers left their job in 2020. So more than half of people left their job. That's 1.8 million jobs, right? And about 960,000 hospitality employees experienced burnout last year. So we're dealing with quite a large population of people going, I'm exhausted. So let's define burnout, right? What are some of the burnout is basically chronic stress that has not been managed successfully. And burnout, in my opinion, people think it's a personal thing, but oftentimes it's really an organizational thing. So some of the causes for burnout are unsustainable workload, which, is organizational issue, perceived lack of control. So people really thrive on more of autonomy and flex. We talk about flexibility in the workforce, but really it's more autonomy. Insufficient rewards for effort. So how are you treating your employees, or not treating? So if they're not seeing that rewards for their effort, it may result in burnout. Lack of supportive community, lack of fairness, and mismatched values and skills. So if you put somebody in and too challenging of a position, it's going to push them into an anxiety mode. If you put them into boring of a position, they're going to be bored. It may end up still in burnout. So it's matching their skills to their challenge, right? Now, some of the signs of burnout, what somebody can watch for, whether you're in a leadership position or in a personal position, is exhaustion. You get irritability or impatient. You might get higher sensitivity. So if you ask somebody to do something, they may just completely lose it, and that might be a sign of burnout. Increased absenteeism, so people calling in sick, and increased mistakes or accidents. So all of these things, when you look at the restaurant environment, if somebody is burned out, then the customer is not having a good experience. The mistakes happening, people are not, treated the way you want to be treated from a customer service perspective. People are not showing up for their shifts, so other people have to pick up the slack, so then they end up working extra hours. So I guess my question is, what are we doing in the restaurant industry to prevent burnout? Because burnout prevention is a lot easier and less costly than burnout cure, right? Or hiring new employees over and over and having this huge high turnover. And you were just mentioning a restaurant that you love in your area that is actually doing some really specific things.
South Block.
South Block, yes.
South
so
Block, yeah.
let's talk about that. Because it's possible, right? You can do things differently, even in the restaurant industry, right? So what does he do that you love?
Well, I can tell he's putting his employees first. I can tell that from a guest perspective, from the outside looking in, because they're happy. By and large, all of his employees, when I walk in there to pick up my smoothie or my juice or get my acai bowl, they look happy. They greet me with a smile. They say welcome. They look, to your point, I love the definition of chronic stress. What is burnout? Because I've read different definitions for it. And Donald Burns, who we had on a few episodes ago, talks about it a lot as well. And one of his definitions is like lack of passion. Like you had 6 things. One of his is like that lack of passion. And I was like, oh, like that's probably a common understanding. But when you said chronic stress and then not managing chronic stress well, that is very apparent to people in the hospitality industry. If you're walking into a restaurant and the people working there are super stressed, because there is a hustle culture in restaurants. That is the restaurant environment. It's like, hurry up, take the order, get the food made, get the food out. Because if you're not going to get the food out, the customer is going to be standing there waiting at their table, impatient, right? And you can read all of that just by looking at someone's body language, right? So, so some of the things he's doing that he talked about on his podcast is yes, incredible flexibility, like providing, and I can't recall how he does it, but he's got a significant amount of flexibility in his schedule. But it's more about his approach to hiring. The people that he hires are very, typical demographic in the restaurant industry, and the age group we talked about. But he hires them with the understanding that they're going to do a 90-day trial period and see if it's a fit for each other. And I
think that's such a great point that you just made, though, because that values alignment. Based on everything that I'm reading and researching about Gen Z and millennials, if the values are aligned between the employee and the company, right, then they're going to be a lot more fulfilled and see the meaning of their work, right? So there's a values alignment that needs to happen.
Right. And addition to that, one of the understandings and expectations is that they're going to learn about the business. They're effectively in a mini business school in his restaurant. So they are learning about P&L statements, and these are 16-year-old kids, right? They're learning about how labor costs and costs of good offset, revenues. They're in a mini business school. So you mentioned earlier, like not gaining knowledge, access to knowledge, education, train, like they're learning about running a business. And it's really impressive. Because it's a structured program and they call it South Block Academy, Exactly.
And so this is the one thing we were talking about before we hit record, right? Where we're in workers shortage economy, right? So where are all these people going to come from? Because there's a lot of jobs, not enough people in America, right? Baby boomers are retiring. The American population growth is slowing. We're on a 50-year trend of not replacing the population. And then 1 in 5 Gen Zers are not interested in going to college. And so it's really interesting when you look at all of these things and you listen to, Gen Zs going, I don't want to go to school. Train me how to do the job and I'll come and do it. But what a great opportunity for companies to really create your own workforce.
Right.
Ashley Furniture Industries is doing this, right? It's a little bit different from the hospitality industry, but they're like, we're going to take recruitment in our hands. We can train somebody, people can learn more from TikTok videos than from, 1 month in college, just about.
Yeah.
And so we're going to take and build our own economy, and people can skip the 4-year college that they can't afford anyway, and they skip the $40,000 in debt or however long that is. So what a great example that is, because you can create your own academy, especially if you have like a franchise or something. You can train people to do exactly the job you want them to do in less time it's going to take them to go to college, and you've built your own workforce. So so that's a great example of what people can do.
Yeah. He's doing just so many things, and and it's so different from so many other places I walk into, that are fast casual type places, even like a Starbucks. Like more often than not, they just are not smiling. And some of it goes back to the expectations of hustle culture in restaurants, which is there. But he just is really, he's not only teaching them and providing an education like what you're talking about, but then he's helping them walk through and make life work decisions based on what he's seeing their skills at. So he also has a really strong promotional program, and training the next store managers, which does become then a full-time salary type of position for folks, if that's what they want. But it's matching people up to what they're looking for in that demographic of the 16 to 25-year-olds. Now the kitchen workers tend to be, a little bit older, not as old as us, but they tend to be a little bit, and so you have to also treat the people that work at the restaurant a little bit different. And we talked about this, like meeting people where they are in life.
And there's a lot of talk about well-being, right? Well-being, but I also look at financial well-being, which is huge, especially in the industry, right? If you don't have that financial well-being, financial security, and in the example you're giving, it sounds like he's offering people a promotion up or to make more money or just to go to a full-time position. So that's a huge opportunity for people to say, okay, he's treating me fairly. He's giving me opportunities to advance in my career, because without the financial well-being, you probably, your mental well-being, emotional well-being, physical well-being, digital well-being, all these other things is like, how do we look at this as holistically from a leadership position? How do you pay people what they're worth, as opposed to, thinking that they're just, rental cars and you can use them for a little bit and then return them, right? So there's, I think there will be more of a emphasis on paying people fairly. In Australia, they, I don't know how much you know about the restaurant industry in Australia, but they have a completely different model. They pay their people a much higher hourly wage, much higher. I want to say it's like $27 an hour or something.
Wow. Yeah.
But Australians don't tip as much. And so when you get a job in a restaurant, you're not counting on tips. You're counting on what you're going to make on an hourly wage. And I don't think people move that much around there, because if you get a good paying job, it's actually a decent income.
Yeah.
So everybody's going to be like, I'm going to Australia.
Yeah. No, an organization that is gaining a lot of traction, it's a nonprofit, organization in our industry, is called CORE, Children of Restaurant Employees. And I was talking to the executive director, Sheila, yesterday, actually. And it's not even just for, the children, it's for the employees themselves. And it's a nonprofit that is helping them pay their expenses, their household expenses, when they get sick or injured or have any sort of life event. And one of the stats she threw out, to your point of, the financial piece, is 1 in 4 restaurant workers cannot afford a medical bill $400 or higher. It's like, that's wow. To people like you and me, it's like, wow, like that could like put them out. So that creates, you go back to that level of stress. It creates a significant amount of stress. And then the labor shortage, they leave, they can't sustain that.
Right.
So
that's a whole different conversation with what the healthcare industry can do, right? But you can't, unless you feel secure in how much money you're making. It's really hard to talk about things like, what are you doing for fun and play? And we can talk about mental health, and we can talk about self-care and the necessity of all of this from an employer perspective and a personal perspective. Sure, of course, having flexible, being able to have a regular breaks and regular team check-ins and PTR allowance. All these things help. But if you're not making enough money, that like looms over your head all the time. That's a huge, huge financial stress is one of the biggest stressors, right? So what are some ways to manage that if, let's say, you're in a position where you're not getting paid more, right? That's why so many people leave to begin with, because they're looking for. I told you I spoke with a restaurant employee, ex-restaurant employee, Maria, and she's from your neighborhood, Washington, D.C. So I interviewed her because I saw her story as a very powerful story as to how people take control of their lives. And so what happened with her is, she was going down that hospitality route. She was getting promotions. She became a manager. She was great at what she was doing. She kept getting more promotions and more promotions. And then the pandemic happened and things got stressful. And so one day she realized she yelled at the customer. And she caught herself and she said, what am I? And I think the customer had, was rightfully yelled at, but she still paused herself and she said, what am I doing? Am I still happy doing what I'm doing? Or do I want to do something else? And growing up, she actually had an art education. She was very attracted to the art. And so the pandemic kind of woke her up. Her mom had passed away, and she remembers her mom asking her, like, well, what does really make you happy? What what brings you joy? Do you still want to do this? So she called herself and said, you know what? I think I might be done with the restaurant industry. So she joined that Great Resignation, but instead of looking for another job, she said, I'm just going to create what I've always wanted to create, and that is my art studio. And so she started creating these the beautiful like glass blonde pieces, and trying to build the business with her working. She works longer hours. That's that's the biggest thing when happens when somebody starts a business. You think I'm gonna get out and the grind, and then you end up working even longer hours. But she said it doesn't feel like work. The stress is completely different because I'm doing something that I really enjoy. She's finding her flow in that project. She's like, I spend more time with my dad and my dog, which is really important to me. And so there was a values realignment, right? In the whole pandemic. Do you really want to have this job, or do you want to do something that gives you more meaning and purpose, even if it's for less money at the beginning, right? And there's a huge fear, and that's the one thing I talk with her about. It's like that fear of how do you leave a job that gives you some security to start something that you don't know how it's gonna go. Right. And she says the fear is still there. It's just on a day-to-day basis. She's like, I get up, I make my coffee, and I go in my studio, and it's her happy place. Right. So there's a lot of different ways you can go about. Do you want to stay in the same job and manage the stress? And there's lots of strategies we can talk about with that perspective, how quickly you can bounce back. Do you want to look for another job? And sometimes, the job may sound great from the outside, but it could just turn into same old. Do you do something on your own?
Yeah.
For more autonomy, flexibility, and taking control of your income.
Right. And in the restaurant industry, it's all boiling down to how do we make this an attractive place to work? Like your story is perfect because tons of people left the industry. And now it's not just how can we bring them back? How do we
Mhm.
keep them?
How
Or
do we keep
mentor
them?
them on, like again, back to Amir at South by. How do we mentor them on to the right profession for them? Right. And
Right.
so it's a lot. It's a big shift for restaurants. And I appreciate you sharing that story. You know, we didn't tell your story yet. So I'd love for you to you know, talk about your story and how you came to found, speaking of your own business, this Unhustle business.
Yeah, I mean, my story is a typical story, not in the restaurant industry, but in the marketing industry, which is
Mhm.
just as a burnout
Mhm.
industry,
Yep.
where I was doing really well. I went down a marketing career path, and I love that. I love the creative aspect of it.
Mhm.
And at some point in time, I was an early adopter of online marketing, digital marketing, and so I realized that I went down that path really early on, which also led me to creating amazing work with great clients and celebrities, and starting communities and building movements. And at some point in time, I realized I'm working 18-hour days. I'm constantly in front of some kind of a screen. So I had put my self-care on the back burner. My health started to deteriorate. I had no time to spend with friends. I stopped doing any kind of outside hobbies. So basically, all I did was work. And when you end up in that state of all you do is work, even if it thrives, gives you joy at the beginning, and gives you that energy and that high and from the hustle, and dopamine hits, all of that, at some point in time it ends up draining you. And when it drains you and depletes you, and you end up burn out, who you are is no longer your job. And so I went down on this existential discovery of who am I and what's my purpose in life? What does life really want out of me? Why are we so stuck in this cult of productivity and doing all the time? What's going on with time to be, time off, self-care? How are you managing your energy? How are you managing your mental health? What does really success look like? And we talked about flipping the script on that. I don't look at work-life balance or work-life integration or work-life harmony. I mean, anytime we start with the word work first,
Mm.
we're putting too much emphasis and attention on work. I have nothing against hard work and nothing against, you know, doing so you can create something meaningful and fulfilling and financially profitable. But I look at life work play design because I realize that it starts with taking care of who you are as a person. It starts with creating a life that you love with the experiences that you want to have in your life, surrounded by the people you want to have in your life. And then what's the work that can support that lifestyle? And what are you doing for play that's regenerating you and replenishing you, instead of just being like passive play? So where does all that energy come from? So I call it life work play design. But there's a lot of interesting angles in there for people with different income level, right? I mean, one of the biggest thing that I get from people is on hustle or privilege. And I'm a first generation immigrant female that realized that success on the outside doesn't mean success on the inside. So when we talk about smiling, I mean, that's one of the first thing you can do when you wake up in the morning, is smile. And how do we turn that constant narrative in our head into something that's positive? What's the outlook you want to have on life? And to your point, in the restaurant industry, learning, what a lot of young people want is to learn and to evolve as human beings. And so how do you provide opportunities to young people to evolve, whether it's through promotions or through something else they want to learn? Are you really asking people about what brings them joy at the end of the day? What's the path they want to take in their life? Or are you trying to just gain everything you can from them from 8 to 5? Because people are going to change anyway, right? I realized that early in my career, because I used to work with Gen Zs and millennials, and I used to get really frustrated because I'm like, I want to train them, and I want to keep them to work for my company, for as long as I can, and it just doesn't work that way.
No.
People move on,
Right.
So, so what can a leader or a company owner do with that understanding to find that cohesiveness and harmony between the company and what the company is trying to achieve at the end of the day. And we all know that we depend on your staff is everything, right? Especially in the restaurant industry. So how do you provide that unique, exclusive experience for your customers on a day-to-day basis?
Right.
Where can you simplify? Where can you add in more like human skills? That's what people want, really. Your customers would be happier having a nice conversation and waiting 5 more minutes as opposed to just sitting there impatiently and seeing your employees on their phones.
Right. Right.
Right.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for sharing your story. It's very cool. I love what you're doing. And I know a lot of people love what you're doing. I know there's a lot of communities around the world forming around Unhustle. So it's very cool. And you have a lot of really good content and articles out there about it. And I know you have a book coming soon, which I'm pretty excited about. But it's funny to me. I'm laughing as you're telling it all because your story and how you founded it, because it is very much like this life, work, play, design thing. I might have messed up the order. Is very like Gen Z millennial friendly, right? You created it, but it is a very, in my mind, my, older looking at that generation. It's like that's a very, very comfortable concept for them. For us, maybe not as much. For us, it's like, whoa, wow, Unhustle, what? It's like, right. For them, it's like, I think of my son who went, he's 23 and his journey so far has been so interesting. He's gravitating towards things that bring him pleasure in life. And he's trying to figure out how he can turn that into work. He's not there yet. He's 23 and he did end up in college, but it took him a little ways to get there. And he's doing music, which, when my husband first heard, like, that's what he's studying, he's like, well, that's a hobby. That's a hobby. It's like, well, no, he's going to figure that out, or he's going to figure something out, but he's like weaving his way. And it's a beautiful thing to watch, like as a mother, right? But that letting go of the control that, again, how I was raised, how we might have been raised, and so I don't know, I went off on a tangent there, and I don't know if you wanted to say something, but
no, that's perfect. But that's what they want. They don't, they want, it's not work to live. It's, it's not live to work. Right. Yeah. So, with that perspective, I mean, the one thing I would say to you, I guess, is a question is, we've been trained that, you got to find your passion, then you got to turn that passion into money making. Do we though? I mean, do we have to turn every single hobby into money making? Because that kind of kills the joy of the hobby.
Right.
If you turn your side hustle into hobby all the time, you kind of kill the joy at some point. So I don't know. I think it's okay to have different hobbies and different interests and not necessarily try to monetize everything.
Right.
Right. Absolutely. Because
that's good mothering advice right there.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't have kids, so I really give away advice.
Just knowledge, right? Like having those hobbies. And I heard you, talking about that on another podcast, which is, are you allowing yourself to just sit or do some activity without all these other distractions, having music on? I think of, when I eat now, for example, one of my friends says, like, I pray over the food and the people that prepared that food before she starts eating. I was like, that's such a lovely thought. And that like slows me down when I'm eating, because I usually rush when I'm eating, even that. Right. But it's like, what are the things you're doing to really enjoy your life and not being thinking about work like 24/7, when you're doing those things, and have you like cultivating some of those hobbies. And that's.
But how can we incorporate this in the restaurant industry? How can a restaurant take this approach and instill in customers to slow down, to be more mindful? Customers and employees, right? I mean, it's a whole circle, right? If you look at a community, if you're going to a restaurant and you're like, I want to sit down and enjoy my food, be mindful of what I'm eating, think of the people who prepared my food. And what if on the other side of that, the restaurant employees are like, I want to take pride in what I'm doing. I want to be mindful of what I'm doing. I want to make sure I give it all while I'm at work. I'm fully focused. I'm doing something I'm proud of. And then when I'm off work, I'm off work. Being more of that fully on or fully off concept is very it's something I talk about with Unhustle. And I think leaders would really appreciate that instead of somebody not really caring about their job and being on their phone on TikTok and Instagram, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do we get people to pay more attention to what they're doing and reward them for the whole experience?
Right. You mean you're asking really good questions? You're interviewing me. I don't have all these answers, but they're really good questions, and I think our listeners will appreciate them. Like just having the right questions in our minds and all these types of things, I think gets us forward.
But I mean, that's how, to me, the answer to that is how do we become a little bit more mindful?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, well, let's do some mindfulness training at work.
Yeah.
That's where empathy comes in. So it's great for leaders to learn, empathetic leadership. It's great for employees to learn how to listen more, to learn how to be more present, to learn how to deal with stress more. So all this mindfulness, it's not just for, your Sunday morning, oh, I'm going to do a meditation for 10 minutes, but let's incorporate a more mindful way to work and watch your focus increase, stress decrease, right? Mood increase, all these things. Organizations can definitely adapt that. There's so many resources that they can tap into.
Right. I love that. Like, I think that is something that this workers everywhere would really appreciate, is like, because mindfulness, it can sound like you said, like we only do it Sunday morning, or I only do it in the morning for 5 minutes, and another buzzword. And I think people think it's a little woo woo, maybe, I don't know, but what do we mean by mindfulness and being more intentional and being more present? And those are the types of conversations that I feel like in the restaurant industry could help people reach their potential. Maybe
I'll give you an
faster.
example.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. I just went to a restaurant here only because somebody said to me, the restaurant is great, but you have to go on such and such date because the waitress is amazing.
Yeah.
I went to that restaurant because of her. And that's what my friend said. You have to go there because she's amazing and she makes the whole experience memorable. So I contacted the restaurant, I find out when she works, and I went there and it was amazing. She was greeted us with a smile, went over the menu, made it fun, anticipated every need, made suggestions when we didn't know what to do, ordered for us when we were hesitant about what we wanted to do. She's like, I'm just going to order for you and you're going to love it.
I love that. Yeah.
We had an amazing experience because of that one person that we had a contact with.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessarily, I mean, the food was great, but it wasn't necessarily, we didn't go there for the food. We went there for that experience.
Right. Right.
And it doesn't take much. Like you said, smile, eye contact, talk with the customers, figure out what they like, make it fun. Everybody's better off at the end of the day. Everybody goes home smiling. It's easy, right? It's easy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, on this idea of empathy, right? And I'm thinking of your story and your example, and I'm thinking, it's easy or easier in a full service restaurant. It's more challenging, probably harder in a fast food restaurant or what we call fast casual, like the Chipotles. But then you say, well, wait a minute, look at Chick-fil-A. They figured it out.
Right.
They figured out how to train people, and you're always greeted with a smile. Pleasure to serve you. Everyone uses Chick-fil-A, and it's like, it's not that complex what they implemented there. Like, it's a pretty, like, to your point, it's pretty simple, focused program.
Yeah.
But for companies that have not had that from the beginning to try to implement that now, I think it probably feels like a big lift for them.
Sure, but what's the alternative? I mean, some companies are not going to make it, right? So you can look at yourself and say, how am I going to make things different?
Yeah.
What's the training, the skills, the simplification, the software that we need to implement to create that overall experience and make it better and create fulfilling work environment for people? Or we're just going to go out of business because that's what's going to happen.
Right.
So the alternative is,
Yeah. And so, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Like empathy, like getting back to this idea of empathy, because I talked to someone last week about empathy, and she was talking about empathy is having one of the ways she described it is having like curiosity curiosity about others, being able, it goes back to like being able to read others. And I feel like this sort of mindfulness training and helping people understand and embrace empathy, because to some people, like to me, it comes pretty naturally. Like I'm pretty empathetic, nature, nurture, whatever, however you want to go down the path, being female, maybe we have more, I don't know, but I'm no scientist or expert. But there are certain people that may have not been raised to understand how to be empathetic. Right. And, you were reminding me of Lauren Fernandez, who was on the podcast, I think it was 2 episodes ago, and she's doing something phenomenal. I mean, she was a very senior person in focus brands and some big restaurants here. And she even she owned, I think, 11 chicken salad chick restaurants. And then she just took a break. She's like, what do I really want to do? And she started this organization, which is a business acceleration firm for restaurants, for small restaurants, to help them simplify, focus, do the right things first, second, third. And it all starts, she said, they do leadership training. Mm-hmm. And it all starts with self-awareness. Mm-hmm. She said, we can't have good leaders if they're not self-aware. Right. You can't train someone to be a good leader if there's zero self-awareness. And I have to think that empathy is fitting in there somewhere.
Absolutely.
So I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of that. And how do we train these leaders to be all these things we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, that's you basically explain it. It comes down to self-awareness, and that's where it starts. It starts with us, right? Mm-hmm. I went to a stress reduction, mindfulness-based stress reduction training. It was eye-opening for me. I think I was very driven and very type A and very goal-oriented person, and having that ability to increase your self-awareness, which really starts with like, okay, how do I feel? I mean, just checking in with yourself, with your body. Like you and I were talking about getting more out of your head, more into your heart, whether it's breathing practices, whether it's body scans, whether it's just sitting still for a few minutes and checking in with yourself and saying, how do I feel? Because we're just rush all the time, right? We're disconnected from our bodies. We know we're experiencing all these emotions and thoughts, but we don't really process them. And so we go through 80,000 thoughts in a day, and 90% of them the next day are the same thoughts. So the same pattern, the same story that we tell ourselves. So self-awareness starts with yourself. And how do you slow down and sit with these thoughts and just be, right? And this is where a lot of Unhustle stuff is like, okay, the doing is great and it's an activity that is necessary, but we've disconnected a little bit and we're not putting the emphasis on just being. And we know people like Nelson Mandela and Gandhi achieved so much in life, but with just being. So the whole myth that you constantly have to be doing in order to achieve something is not, it's just a myth, right?
Right.
So self-awareness, mindfulness, meditation, breathing practices, time in nature, time alone. We're constantly bombarded with information, with notifications, with news, with all these things. We fill our heads with so much that we leave very time for just presence and breathing and sitting alone with our thoughts. So all of these things lead to, to your point, curiosity with somebody. How are you? Can you imagine what this person is going through? But that takes time to slow down, right? You don't know what they're going through. When you're talking with an employee, you don't know what's going on through their head. You don't know what kind of day they had. You don't know what kind of life they're dealing with. So curiosity, right? What's going on? I just ask them, like, how are you? How are you doing, really? What is going on? And really being mindful about their response as opposed to just checking it off on the list. Like, I ask them how they're doing. So, but did you really care? Because as humans, we feel that. We feel the energy. We feel the empathy. We know if somebody's really genuinely interested or they're just hey, how are you? And by the time you say how you're doing, you walk by, right?
Yeah. You know,
So
you're reminding me of, I heard someone say once, and this always stuck with me. I'm a human being, not a human doing.
right,
And I was like,
exactly.
I love that, you know? And for
Yeah.
me, and probably for a lot of people listening, I'm imagining, you know, people thinking, wow, like this all sounds great, but really? And it's like, no, really, like I can sit here and say that some of my quote unquote best ideas or best thinking has happened when I've been still.
That's when aha moments are created. I mean, there's a lot
Mhm,
of research that goes into that area.
mhm, mhm,
So if you have employees who are on their phones, I would much rather them just they sit there and stare at the distance, right? Because that's where daydreaming occurs. That's where the default mode network gets activated. That's where aha moments are born. Your
mhm,
aha moments are not born when you're on a computer or when you're necessarily working, but when you're not doing anything or when you're taking a shower, when you're going for a walk, right? So all these
mhm.
times we look at them as non-productive times, but in reality, if you want to go that aspect, there's a lot of creativity and productivity
Yeah,
actually in these moments.
yeah,
But it's really hard for humans to do nothing or sit still.
yeah,
It's really hard. It's
yeah.
it's not easy. But if you're talking about rest and recovery protocols, right, to prevent burnout, we are not putting enough emphasis on the rest and recovery, on proper rest and recovery. So what I mean by that is not the passive rest and recovery, but proper active regenerative rest and recovery, which in most cases is actually more active. So things that take your focus and you feel fully engaged, fully focused on the activity are normally things that are challenging, but not too challenging.
Mhm,
And so you have enough skills to do it. So that's where things like mountain biking and rock climbing and
mhm,
kite surfing in my case, or all
mhm.
these things that use your mind and body are actually more replenishing for you than just sitting on the couch watching Netflix,
Mhm.
right? So
Or
then
scheduling, like, I gotta go to the gym right now and do this and or run to the next, like, I heard that example, run to the next yoga class, you know, and you're still taking work with you, but
speed yoga.
where can you really shut it off? Like, you know? Um,
We need to turn that parasympathetic nervous system on, right? So if you're constantly go, 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 and you're going from you have a busy day at a restaurant, go, 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 long shift, and then you're running to the next thing. I learned that the hard way that I was go go go. I would wake up in the morning, hit the gym early morning, and now I've completely switched that around, where I'm reserving my morning time for more creative work, and then doing my workouts later in the day. But if you constantly go go go, your body needs the opposite, right? You need kind of the yin and the yang a little bit, because doing something that's slower pace would be beneficial to your nervous system. So I had to slow down my workouts, and instead of a hardcore heat workout or CrossFit, I started doing more qigong and slow yoga. And it's really hard when you're like that driven and you're going at that speed all the
mhm,
time. It's really
mhm.
hard to do the slower pace activity, but
Yeah,
that's where our nervous systems get more aligned.
right, right. Wow, lots of good stuff, lots of food for thought here, Milena. I really appreciate you sharing all of this, and I think I'd like to wrap just thinking about what would be, you know, based on this conversation we've had, where we've talked about all sorts of different aspects of creating a more human, you know, centered culture, you know, within restaurants. What would be three recommendations, or however many? I don't really care how many, but what would you recommend mainly to restaurant owners and managers? Where do you start?
Yeah, I would say get together with your team and decide together. And
Hmm.
you may work with an outside consultant. I don't know if you don't know how to do this, but how do you create more of a work open, positive work culture where people are not afraid to show up themselves, where leaders lead with vulnerability, with
Hmm.
empathy, with commonly shared goals
Hmm.
for the business, so people can have more of an ownership into what they're doing, right? How are their values aligned with the values of the company? And sometimes it's okay to part ways if that's not a good match, right? But getting clear on what's the work culture that you want to create, I think would be step number one, and how to go about creating more of a positive, open workplace culture. For burnout prevention, what are some things you can implement starting tomorrow? Maybe it's PTO or mental health, or mandatory breaks, or flexible work schedule, right? I mean, what are some things that within your control, within the resources that you have with, and the team that you're working with, what can you do tomorrow to implement some burnout prevention strategies? Maybe it's, self-care days or afternoons. There's so many things you can tap into. And third, I would say implement some kind of mindful, empathetic leadership and training. I think the young people are drawn to more learning and developments to begin with. So offering that to them, it will be beneficial to the managers as well as to the employees and the frontline staff.
Yeah. Especially since I think the numbers around just like anxiety, the amount of young
mental
people
health, anxiety, stress. How do we build stress resilient workforce, right? So that people, life's tough and things are going to happen, right? But how quickly you can bounce back, how quickly you can show back up to work with your full energy and your full smile. What are the strategies? A lot of mindfulness trainings touch on that, right? What are the strategies to decrease anxiety, decrease stress, because that leads eventually to burnout.
Yeah. And all those things you just mentioned, thank you. Those were 3 great tips and ways to get started. But let's just not forget that we must mentor it ourselves, that we can implement these things and do these programs. But if we're not living it, it's all BS. People won't believe it. And then it won't flow out to the organization. And so I think, I always remind myself, and I even share with my team members, things I'm doing that are like self-care sort of oriented things. I learned recently about myself. I kind of knew this, but I ignored it. I can't do three Zoom meetings back to back in a row. I just can't. Like it. I can, but I'm miserable. So what's why? So build in a break, Jen. Like build in a break. Take a little walk, even if it's just a short little thing around the neighborhood. Just go lay down on the bed, whatever it is, right? But that's how I'm mentoring it, at least.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So self-care needs to be built into your workday, right? Yeah. And self-care is not necessarily a 30-minute break. Yeah. It's nice to have a 30-minute break every hour, but it doesn't work that way in the real world. So to your point, self-care could be just drink some water in between meetings, take a 5-minute break, do some breathing, close your eyes, just exhale. It takes, you can do box breathing technique, which is what the Navy SEALs use, right? To minimize your stress level and kind of recalibrate your nervous system. It will probably take a minute of doing a deep box breathing technique. It takes a minute to get back into sync. And restaurant employees can do that every time they're in a stressful situation. Just do some box breathing, right? It's a self-care practice.
Explain that, because I used to know what box breathing was, and I forget now.
You inhale to the count of 4. Yeah. So you inhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. You hold your breath for the count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. You exhale to the count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold your breath to the count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And you do this like 4 or 5 times.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And your stress level.
Inhale, hold, down. Exhale, hold.
Hold. Yeah. Easy. Everybody can do it. It takes 60 seconds. You can, go in the back of the kitchen and do it, and then go deal with the angry customer.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Milena. I really appreciate it. And just before we close, let people know how they can get in touch with you or follow you or find you, all those good things.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything is at unhustle.com. That's the website. Everything on social media is either under my name, Milena Regos, or Unhustle. For the most part, everything with Unhustle is at Unhustle. I'd love to hear what your aha moment was from this podcast. Tag me and let me know. And I do offer a free ebook that people can download to see how some leaders and companies have implemented the Unhustle practices. They can download it at unhustle.com/ebook. And
it's a great ebook because I downloaded it, and it's got a lot in there, a lot of good resources in there. In fact,
Thank you.
I scheduled a self-care session in our company for a lunch and learn tomorrow.
Oh, good job.
I'm going to use some of the tips that you have in there just to try to, spur some open conversation and dialogue. So we'll see. But thank you so much for, helping contribute to the conversation of reinventing restaurants. You're a superstar. You're doing amazing stuff. So thanks for everything.
Thank you. You're too kind. Thank you so much, Jen. Thank you for having me.
Have a great day.
Thank you for checking out this episode of Restaurants Reinvented. This show is brought to you by Q, a restaurant tech company paving a brighter future for operators with the industry's first unified commerce platform. If you enjoyed what you learned in this episode, make sure to follow Restaurants Reinvented in your favorite podcast app, or visit qbeyond.com/podcast to get immediate access to all of the latest episodes.